Evidence of God. Told to you by the person who lived it, Esther Luttrell.
Episode 2.
The pain of loss it's always staggering, whether it's a parent or a sibling, a relative, a dear friend. But the pain of losing a child is almost beyond description. With my deep longing for family and home, it's little wonder I married blindly and much too young. I didn't know Arthur Riemann well enough, but it wouldn't have mattered. All I wanted was a home. That we were completely wrong for one another never entered my mind. I hadn't experienced the way a functional family operates, so I had no model to go by except what I saw in movies, and those always had a happy ending. Not that there was anything wrong with Art. There wasn't. He was a fine fellow. But he was as naive about the realities of life as I was. He, too, had a broken and dysfunctional background. When I finally left him, I explained that I was taking up a place in his life that should go to someone who could love him as he deserved to be loved. We didn't part friends, but years later we reconnected, and I was relieved to find there was no animosity or hard feelings. I recognized him as someone I once knew, but I felt no more personal connection to him than I felt when we were married. It was my second marriage, 2 years after my divorce from Art, that blessed me with the birth of a beautiful little boy we named Todd. When I was a bulging 8.5 months pregnant, my husband's mother invited us to participate in a day of Bible study. It was taking place some miles away. Church was an important part of my in-laws' life, and of course we said yes. On the morning of the event, my mother-in-law asked if I'd drive my car and pick up 2 elderly women in their local church parking lot. The ladies wanted to go to Bible school, but had no means of transportation. My husband and his mother planned to go on ahead of us and help set up for the day's activities. Well, the white-haired women were waiting just where my mother-in-law said they'd be waiting, but there was a third person I wasn't expecting. In fact, there were 2 more people that no one had mentioned, a young woman and a little boy who was, maybe 2 years old. The older women climbed into the back seat, and the mother and her son sat up front with me. As we traveled along the highway headed for the Bible school in a neighboring town, the young woman and I struck up a conversation. I'm sure it started out with the usual, "When is your baby due?" from her, and my reply that I had another 2 weeks or so to go if all went according to plan. I don't really remember how talk got around to her sharing with me that she'd lost a child to crib death before the birth of the son in her arms. And I clearly recalled my response. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I don't think I could handle something like that. I wouldn't have the strength." And I clearly recall that she said in a soft, firm voice, "Yes, you would have the strength." Out of the entire 45-minute trip, that's all that stands out in my mind regarding our conversation. We arrived. The women went their various ways with the understanding that we'd meet back in the Bible school parking lot at the end of the day. And several hours later, we were making our return trip. As I pulled into the church parking lot to let everybody out, the young mother handed me a slip of paper. "Here's my address," she said. "If you ever have a moment, stop by." Well, I thanked her, and I said I would. Todd was born in November. I remember it was a clear, star-filled night, and what a beautiful child he was. I adored him from the first moment I laid eyes on him. There was a connection that seemed, somehow odd and yet natural. It was as if I'd known him forever. He was no stranger to me. 3 months later, my husband accepted a job in a town, about 200 miles from where his parents lived. We'd been there a little less than a month when I heard a new radio station was about to open, and I wondered if I might find a job with them. My husband was a professional with a nonprofit organization, which meant the salary was just barely enough for us to live on. A grandmotherly lady was recommended as a sitter for Todd for the hour I planned to be gone for the interview. We never left him with anybody before, but he was so good-natured. I knew it would work out just fine. My husband came home from work over his noon hour and drove me to my appointment, and then less than an hour later, we were on our way back home. "What a delightful little boy," the babysitter exclaimed as she got her purse and was getting ready to go. I gave him his lunch and he just went down for a nap, but what a lovely disposition he has. Call on me anytime. I'd love to sit with him again. My husband was waiting to drive her home, and then he planned to go back to work for the remainder of the afternoon. Once they were out of the house, I started for the bedroom. Now, the tiny little square of space, it held our bed, a bureau, and Todd's crib tucked into the far right-hand corner. From the threshold, I could only see the solid end of the crib. I couldn't see inside it. But the vision that met my eyes as I stepped into the doorway was not one I'll ever forget. I saw translucent hands in a prayerful position, reaching from somewhere beyond the ceiling, angled down toward the crib. And the hands glowed like luminous pearls, at least 15 feet long, and with palms pressed together, they were reaching down for my child. Without stepping into the room and without even seeing Todd, I knew. And I whirled around and I raced through the living room and I threw open the screen door, and our car was just pulling away from the curve when I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Todd's dead." My precious God let me see those shimmering hands. He let me know that Todd was with him, but he did even more than that. A week or so after the funeral, we returned to my mother-in-law's home for a weekend. It was a Saturday morning, and we settled in, and I told my husband I was going to take the car and go visit the lady I'd driven to Bible school that day some months back. Her calm assurance that I would have strength to face crib death if I ever found myself in that situation meant so much during those difficult first days. Fortunately, I'd kept the scrap of paper on which she jotted down her address, and I recognized that it would be somewhere on the fringe of town. I knew the area fairly well, but I couldn't place that particular 100 block. Craning my neck and squinting at street signs, I cruised up and down the length of the small downtown area, but I didn't see the exact address I was looking for. There seemed to be no one on the street to ask, and of course, there was no such thing as GPS back then. Finally, I drove across railroad tracks. There was nothing over there except cornfields and an agricultural loading dock. That's where I spotted a man on a platform. And when I pulled up, he jumped down and he came to the car, and I showed him the piece of paper the young mother had given me. "I don't know," he said, scratching his head. "There ain't really no address like that around here." And he sort of squinted against the glare of the sun, and he pointed. "Now those numbers, that put the place smack in the middle of that field. And you can see, there ain't no houses anywhere around here. Sorry." When I got back to my in-laws, I asked my mother-in-law if she knew the woman I brought to Bible school, the one with the little boy. And she replied that she never saw her before, and she hadn't seen her since. She thought maybe the woman was a friend of mine. Well, the lady may not have been a friend in the strictest sense of the word, but she was definitely an angel who helped me get through some of the darkest days of my life. Much, and I mean much later, I found comfort in Matthew 19:14. But Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of heaven." And before that, Matthew 18:14. So it is not the will of my Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. Oh, it'd be a lie to say that I took it like a noble mother, that I wept a bit and then turned it over to God, because in fact, I did no such thing. My sorrow was so deep, and my despair beyond consolation. I cried and I tiptoed around the house for months, trying not to wake up the baby, forgetting that the house was so quiet, not because Todd was napping, but because my baby was gone from earth forever. My heart was so heavy, I didn't see how I could go on, despite the fact I was at peace in so many other ways. I was grateful that God loved me enough that He let me see His precious hands reach for my child. He loved me so much that He waited to take Todd until I got home, and I could witness the miracle of God's luminous hands coming through the bedroom ceiling to gather up His tiny son. But still, the ache was unbearable. I remember it was nearing Easter, and I knew it was going to be difficult to watch other children with their colored eggs and their brightly colored baskets. I'd be reminded of all the Easters I'd have to face without Todd. I could think of only one thing that could ease the heartache. I had to do something for others, and fast. Well, we had almost no money. I mean, what could I do for others that would be meaningful when there was nothing to work with? I racked my brain, but nothing came to mind. Then one day I was driving back from, somewhere, and I had to cross a very poor section of town. And it was there that the Salvation Army was headquartered. I didn't know that until I saw a sign on a little modest wooden building. And on impulse, I pulled to a stop and I went inside. And I had absolutely no idea why or what I planned to do. Well, I ended up sitting at a desk in front of a really lovely man, identified by a plaque on his desk as Captain Moffat. At least, I hope I'm remembering his name correctly. In any case, I found myself telling him about the loss of my son within the last few days. And then I surprised the living daylights out of myself. I told him that I wanted to give an Easter party for the children of this particular neighborhood. You what? My mind was asking, but my mouth, it just kept right on working. How many children did the captain think might attend such an event? Well, he contemplated, let me see now. If we open it up to the neighborhood in general and not just the children of our members, oh no, I'd say maybe 100 or so. I remember my matter-of-fact nod, and I also remember thinking, 100 kids? I don't have a cent. Oh, what am I going to do now? But I left assuring the man that I'd start working on it right away. But I had no idea how such a thing was ever going to happen. And to make matters worse, Captain Moffat nearly clicked his heels with excitement when he realized construction of the new youth center would be completed by Easter. Why, we could give the party in there. Yeah, of course we could, sure. On my $2.15. Now, let me think. 100 children, $2.15. Oh, man, what had I gotten myself into? Well, 2 days later, I came to my senses and I realized I'd made promises I had no way of keeping. As much as I hated doing it, I didn't have any choice but to go back to Captain Moffat and admit my mistake. So I was crossing those railroad tracks again when I spotted a huge cardboard sign tacked to the trunk of an oak tree. And in what looked like spray paint, it read, "Easter party!" ! Everybody invited! The place, date, and time appeared in neat letters along the bottom of the frayed edge. Now, I'd been worried enough about how to give treats to 100 children, but now everybody was invited. Oh, my Lord, dear heaven, what did I do and what to do? I went home in a gloomy funk, but God was having none of that. He put it in my mind to call a local candy factory and ask if they'd like to donate chocolate bunnies for my extravaganza. So I did, and they would. Glory be to God. He was planning a party whether I was in on it or not. Okay, so now I had several hundred chocolate bunnies pledged by the manufacturer, but I needed baskets. So I called Woolworths, not national or regional headquarters, but the one down at the mall, and I spoke to their manager. I told him I was giving a party for underprivileged children at the new Salvation Army Youth Center, and that such and such candy company was donating hundreds of chocolate bunnies. Would they consider providing Easter baskets? Without a moment's hesitation, the answer was yes. Where would I like them delivered, and on what date? I hung up just stunned. I mean, I was nobody. I knew no one in town other than my husband's boss and his wife. How did these people know I wasn't some kind of con artist? Why did they believe me? Who was I to ask all of this of people and groups who didn't know me? And they didn't even ask probing questions. Well, I put my doubts aside and I began to think about what the party would look like. How could I make it one of the best experiences these children had ever known? I won't bother you further with details, but this is the way it turned out. The local Eagle Scouts put on a dynamic program reciting the Lord's Prayer in Indian costumes and in sign language. The local PTA provided drinks for every one of the nearly 200 raggedy children who came to the Easter party on that wonderful spring evening. A costume storyteller from the library came and told spellbinding tales, while a lighting engineer provided color strobes and other ingenious effects that perfectly complemented the program. And the PTA also provided adult chaperones. And then the Girl Scouts, they acted as servers. With no chairs for that many people, everyone sat on the floor in a huge circle around the various entertainers. And every child got a chocolate bunny. Every child got a basket. And every child left the party with a heart filled with happiness and the knowledge that they were loved. Maybe we don't always get the connection between the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ and an Easter basket. But on that afternoon, it came together for me. Strangers had given their time and poured out generous resources in order to give underprivileged children an evening filled with adventure and goodwill. And God showed me how to let Him do all the work. And if that wasn't proof of the evidence of His existence, I don't know what is. And to think it all came about because of Todd. What a blessing he was, even though he was only on earth for a little more than 90 days. 2 Corinthians verse 1, chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble. Think about what you can do that you might not have thought of before, something that will help others while not placing a financial or any other kind of burden on yourself. Think about it. I bet you there's something. earthly father's gypsy nature, or perhaps I just flat didn't know how to be traditional or how to handle anything having to do with establishing roots. I moved from the Midwest after my 10-year marriage to Todd's father also ended in divorce. I'd been writing educational films and programs for regional cable TV. My first salary was a frozen turkey. But I decided that what I really needed was an agent to help further my chances of earning a decent living. Now, mind you, the word career, it never entered my head. I just needed work. And the only thing I knew how to do was write. After all, I reasoned, anybody can write. You just pick up a pencil and you're in business. My business was much too small, and it barely kept me in pencils. So I called ahead and I booked a motel room in Beverly Hills, California, which, according to my map, was an eighth of an inch from Hollywood, the place agents thrived, or so I was told. When I arrived at my destination, it was late in the afternoon, and I pulled off of one of the main thoroughfares. I parked and I went in to register. Even as I made my way to an airy second-story corner unit, I knew the place wouldn't work for me. It was right on a noisy boulevard, and I needed quiet so I could write. Now, I have no idea what I thought I was going to write in the 4 days I planned to be in town, but I do recall that having quiet was one of my major objectives. So I put my overnight case on the bed, and I went over to the window, and I looked down on more traffic than I realized was on the planet. And the racket of the passing cars and the impatient motorists, it just permeated the air. So 10 minutes later, management cheerfully refunded my money, and off I went. Once I was behind the wheel of my car, while still in the parking lot, I asked myself what I intended to do now, and myself had no idea. I didn't even know which way to drive to find Hollywood. Never mind why I didn't think about that when I made the motel reservation, but I was thinking about it now. You know, I can't read a map any better than I can read a Polish guidebook. It's all gibberish. And I've never gotten the hang of distinguishing north from south, east or west, except, of course, the sunrise and sunset. I do know the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but where it is in between those two times, I have no clue. The sky looks all the same to me. So I sat in the parking lot, contemplating my situation. I had a teeny bit of money, an 11-year-old car, no sense of direction, and 4 days to find myself an agent. So I said, well, God, it's up to you. I'll start driving, and I'll listen for your directions. I'll follow my feelings, because I know that it will be you leading me. Thank you, Lord. I believe that God loves us just as much as he loves dolphins and whales. Both species are equipped with sonar that alerts them to an obstruction ahead. I mean, they're sailing along underwater when suddenly they get this little beep, beep that tells them to veer left or veer right to avoid calamity. But because whales and dolphins lack the argumentative nature of most of us human beings, they obligingly dart this way or that, and they continue uneventfully on their way. And I contend that we also get a beep beep when we need God's directive. It's called that still small voice inside us. Instinct, some may say. A hunch, others call it. And I call it a God nudge. And I trust it with all my being. Now, I'm driving along aimlessly along Santa Monica Boulevard when I felt a strong urge to turn left at a stop sign. So I turned left, and I continued driving until I felt a strong urge to turn to the right. Now I was on Hollywood Boulevard, with no idea I was about to enter a place that can best be described as where the crime meets the grime. I understand it's been cleaned up some in recent years, but back then it was flat out terrible and dangerous. However, I trusted God's nudge completely. There was a wedge of land just beyond the famous Mann's Chinese Theater, that's formerly Grauman's, where stars have placed their hands and footprint in wet cement, I guess, going back to the 1930s. Anyway, this wedge of land held a liquor store and a tiny, tiny motel. And I thought, now, surely God didn't intend for me to go there. I mean, surely. Well, surely he did. The nudge I trusted felt like a gentle fist to my solar plexus. It was a sensation too strong to misinterpret, and it was leading me straight into a parking area behind that motel. You sure, God? I did ask. But as I asked, I was coming to a halt, and then I stared. A decidedly unglamorous lodging was in front of me. But God seemed sure. The proprietor was a lovely little Asian who greeted me with a big welcoming smile. I explained that I needed peace and quiet because I was a writer and I'd come to Hollywood in search of an agent. Yes, she agreed with an enthusiastic nod. You need me to iron dress for appointment? Well, that was more hospitality than I'd anticipated, but it was certainly welcome. For a tiny sum, about half of what I was paying at the other motel, she showed me to a clean room on the second floor. I think there were probably only 6 or 7 units in the entire place. So she asked if there was anything else she could do for me. She accepted a dress that was crumpled from the trip, and she seemed thrilled to be able to participate in my little Hollywood adventure. I sat on the side of that immaculate bed, and I said a very humble, "Thank you, precious God." The place was perfect, and everything was in divine order. I love Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. The point is that we have everything we need to make good decisions if we'll just trust that instinct, trust that it's God at work. We have every bit of knowledge we need in order to be in our rightful place. Unlike the wise dolphin and whale, we argue. We try to reason with God, and we explain to him why this or that won't work. If I'd not trusted his direction, or if I'd not recognized God at work in my life, things would have turned out quite differently. For one thing, if I used reason and not faith, I would not have ventured into Hollywood after seeing the condition of the place, and I would not have stopped at the modest little motel next to the liquor store, and I would not have been blessed to find an innkeeper who looked after me as if I were her daughter. Many other blessings followed during those remarkable 4 days, but I'll stop for now with the one story. If we will but trust the Lord with all our heart and all our soul, he'll never, ever let us down. He might not give us the answer we had in mind, but it will be better and it will be right. Lean not on our own understanding, but acknowledge him, and he will make straight our path. When things turn out right, take the time to acknowledge God and to thank him. Don't try to puzzle things out. Our life is in his hands, and he treasures us. It's his great pleasure to give us our dearest desire, so long as that desire is one intended for good and is based on our faith in him. We keep trying to deserve his love, but that isn't necessary. We deserved it from the moment we were born. It's just such a shame that we aren't taught these things as we're growing up. It'd save us so many years of heartache, so much pain, as we learn our lessons the hard way. If only we were taught to say Mama and Dada and God all at the same time, just think how much easier our lives would be. Well, of course, the word God isn't enough. We need to be taught who and what he is. I think the problem is that for most of us, those who raised us didn't know either. I don't think they purposely kept the knowledge from us. I think they were so busy trying to figure out their own life and to handle their own problems that they didn't know to tell us about our real Father, the one who never lets us down. Well, my parents didn't know. Most parents don't know. I know I didn't. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Again, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. He will. I don't want to leave without thanking the men that you heard on this program today. That was Patrick McGranahan and Jack Diamond. Also, the musical stings that you heard. Those were composed by Fesliyan Studios, David Fesliyan, Steve Oxen, and David Rinda. I hope you'll click on the subscribe and the like buttons. That's what makes it possible for us to continue to bring you these kinds of programs that I do hope you're enjoying. There are 24 chapters in all, so I'm looking forward to you coming back and maybe listening to the rest of them with us. Till then, thank you, and God bless.